You are now listening to the Paul McGUIRE Report. This is Paul McGUIRE. I have some vital, critical information to communicate with you. If you absorb this information, if you pay attention to this information, it will give you the potential to survive when other people don't survive. That's how serious the content of today's program is. We're going to investigate and uncover the deep, dark secret behind genetically modified foods or artificial foods. And we're not just talking about, one or two or a handful of additives to a food product. We're talking about a deliberate revolution that is being implemented by the globalist elite, also known as the Great Reset, a mechanism of control via food. A CIA analyst said relatively recently, the analyst commented on an age-old historical principle involved in military conflict and military warfare, and that is the understanding and the implementation of the following principle. Food can be weaponized, put in the right hands or the wrong hands. Food can be used as a weapon to dominate and control people with incredible power and incredible force. Because once you take control of any nation or individual's food supply, you have essentially conquered them. And so the deprivation of food, the withholding of food, and also the releasing of food is all about an elite, the hidden kings and queens of planet Earth, an elite dominating the average public, the middle class, lower class, hardworking middle class, different categories like that. They are being dominated ever increasingly through the production of things like artificial food. Now, let's just get right into the most important parts of this. As insane as this sounds, and believe me, it sounds insane. In fact, it was so insane that, which is often the case with me when I do research, when I do heavy-duty research, I am not a gullible, the minute I hear something, I believe it type of a person. I don't think that most of you are either, or you wouldn't listen to the Paul McGUIRE Report. I'm a person who, when I hear something that just sounds really outrageous, my initial reaction is not to simply accept it. My initial reaction is to be very guarded, to be suspicious, even skeptical, and wait before I make a decision on the validity of some statement or claim. I continue to research from multiple sources, diverse sources, contacts that I have. I continue to do a deep dive of research until I find out the answer as to whether or not some outrageous thing that I've heard or has been reported, I need to know if it's really true or it's just some, wacko delusion of the moment. So I don't just accept stuff I hear, and most of you are the same way or you wouldn't listen to the program. And people are often surprised when they hear that one of my primary characteristics is skepticism. They would expect me to be some kind of person who just believes in every story or account that comes his way. That's not true at all. In fact, the opposite is true. So let's dive into one that, when I first began reading about this, which was literally many years ago, decades ago, and I stayed away from it because, there's a lot of things that I know that if I came on the program and communicated with you what I know about certain things, there's a sizable percentage or a significant percentage of the listeners, it's just too high of a concept for them. And they would end up rejecting me and rejecting the concept if I just laid all the cards out on the table. Because when you're presented with information that it goes against everything you were taught and programmed to believe in, it's like walking into a storm. And we've all seen the hurricanes. blasting the state of Florida and the East Coast. So wrap your head around this reality, because it is a reality and it can be documented. This is not some made up fear-mongering fairy tale, okay? I'm talking to you about facts. And let's start with this one. The nation of Singapore, okay? The nation of Singapore passed a law which approves that 16, at this moment, they're going to raise the number, but at this particular moment, Singapore approved the usage of 16 different insects, bugs, to be used in producing human food. So the goal of the globalist elite, the Great Reset, is while they eat organic steaks grown on their ranches, and many of them have, massive ranches and farmland everywhere from New Zealand and Australia and scattered throughout the world and hidden even in the United States of America, where they are producing their own high-end, pure, non-GM food because they want to live. Meanwhile, simultaneously, while they are eating the highest quality of pure foods, they want to coerce you, persuade you, and even force you to eat things like bugs. Now, I get it. It sounds completely crazy, completely unbelievable. And as a matter of fact, let me give you a little word of warning. I advise you to use the utmost discretion of when and where you release this kind of knowledge. Because for most of the people that you might talk to about it, the overwhelming majority will instantaneously reject it, scoff at it, mock you, laugh at you, ridicule you, call you names like you're a nut, a conspiracy theorist, and that's just the beginning. They will go all out berserk on you if you dare to tell them this documented truth, which is that the globalist elite that control everything, including the global food supply, are now, and have been for quite some time, developing insects to be used as food for your children in the school lunch programs. And eventually their goal is to make the majority of food products available in the supermarket, etc. They won't be made of things. Things will no longer be what they used to be. So meat will no longer be meat. It will be a collection of pulverized insects and a ton of chemicals to fool your brain into thinking you're eating a steak or a hamburger or something. Now, this is just a little ounce of the documentation I have to share with you. I warned about it in my books like The Greatest Battle for the Hearts and Minds of Mankind in the World and Power from On High. I warned you, and I prepared you for this. And so as shocking as it is, I have complete documentation and greater detail in my books, but I also, where we charge nothing for and we need your support to continue to do this, I'm going to communicate to you as best I can, obviously for free at no charge, the truth of why and how they're manufacturing insects into human food. So the nation of Singapore approved 16 insects as being legally okay to manufacture as food for humans. That means they want to feed human beings and children insects chemically altered so they don't taste like insects, dye them, shape them into certain shapes that visually make it look like food, but it's a complete masquerade. The food that you will be eating and your children will be eating are made out of insects and other things, worms, insects. Now, when we're talking about insects, let's talk about insects. And I'm no expert on insects, but we're talking about stuff like ants, worms, cockroaches. Cockroaches will be a huge component in insects being turned into food. There may no be there may be no sizable cockroach threat where you live because of the location or whatever. But in many inner cities, because of the dense population, there are quadrillions of cockroaches hiding in all kinds of crevices. And so easy to catch these cockroaches and then pulverize them, mash them up, dye them, add a ton of chemicals to them. And if you were not told that it came from a cockroach, you probably wouldn't even know. Is it good for you? I doubt it. Now, remember, they have told you, the Great Reset has told you, just like the communists tell you, and the Nazis tell you, and the Marxists tell you, and communist Russia and communist China, they always tell you, to whatever degree, what they're doing, because that's an occult principle. And ultimately, it's Satanists who control communism and Marxism and secret occult societies. So, Singapore is not the first country to legalize insects in producing human food. There's a whole bunch of nations that have legally approved insects to be used for human food. And so Singapore is just the latest. And why are they doing this? Because the Great Reset people want them to. Remember, the Great Reset people have told you, bombarded you, and your friends whose brains are on autopilot. The Great Reset people have brainwashed you into believing the following lie. And it is a lie, because communism, Marxism, Nazism always proceed on lies. And the lie they tell you is you will own absolutely nothing, but you will never be happier in your whole life. That's a complete and total lie. If it was true, they would live the way they're preaching to you and forcing you to live. They voluntarily own nothing if it was really good. But they do the opposite. They hoard, they consume, they buy up nations, they buy up food supplies, they control and own everything they can get their hands on. So use your common sense? You've got to have been socially engineered by some kind of lobotomy not to have the basic rational abilities to figure out this is the biggest stinking lie I've ever been told in my entire life. If it was good and beneficial and pleasurable and enjoyable, the globalist elite, the trillion-billion-dollar families that control this nation and control the world, they would be on a diet of insects. But they're not. They're eating the highest quality fish and meats and so on and so forth. Totally organic, totally healthy. And if owning nothing was the key to being truly happy, then the globalist elite and the trillionaire, billionaire families that control America and the rest of the world, they would be the first in line to stop owning things, because they would truly believe that they will never be happier in their whole lives until they stop owning things. But if you look at the facts surrounding any elite, globalist elite, or their families' lives, you see that they have a lust for materialism and acquisition. They want to own real estate. They want to own people. They want to own sex trafficking. They want to own the drug supply. They want to own everything under the sun they want to own. So they are doing in violent opposition to what they preach, just like the communists always did. They're lying to you. And yet, even though they're lying to you right to your face, and when I was a kid, growing up in Jackson Heights, Queens, New York City, if you were to say, well, the key to happiness is to own nothing, and then you'll never be happier in your whole life, you would be mocked. You would be laughed at for being the fool on the hill, for being the clown. I mean, nobody with any brains at all could possibly be so stupid as to believe something. So that's such an outrageous lie. So they're telling you that, and they do the opposite. The same thing with insects for food. They're telling you and your children how great it is. I guarantee you they wouldn't eat an insect if their life depended upon it. They're not eating insects any more than they're giving up ownership of everything they try to control and own and dominate. So the Singapore Food Industry, SFA, approved that at this present time, 16 insects, which include silkworm, I guess it's pupa, and mealworm, can be sold as human food. These insects and insect products can be used for human consumption or as animal feed for producing animals. So even if you're not directly eating insects, and let's say you go to some kind of restaurant and get a steak or a hamburger or something, how do you know that the hamburger or steak was not produced by a cow or some other animal that was deliberately fed insects and chemicals, and then they just convert it into a steak or a hamburger? You don't know unless you check it out, because the media in America is controlled by just 8 all-powerful groups. I list their names in my book, Power from On High. Okay, so countries like Great Britain, Australia, the EU nations, most of them at this point, have already approved some insects for human consumption. However, in America, there are existing regulations that contain few references specifically addressing insects. So that means there are legal loopholes in the United States of America which potentially allow for the elite to manufacture insects, even in America, as food. And so they use all these fancy words and medical terms. It's stuff always to lie to you. So they say what they're doing is they're helping the ecosystem, the biological ecosystem, by producing alternative sources of protein. And to them, even though they would never eat it, an alternative source of protein is crushed up insects. And a lot of startup companies, startup entrepreneurs are trying to rush into this area and get in on this, what they believe is a great business opportunity, which is the manufacturing of food from insects, the manufacturing of human food from insects. So the insect market, from an investment standpoint, is going to skyrocket. Now, Bill Gates, of course, is involved in this financially, along with U.S. government agencies, United Nations agencies, the Defense Advanced Research Project, DARPA. Don't ask me why they would be involved in. Well, yeah, this is why they would be involved. It's easy to figure it out. All intelligence agencies worth their salt understand that food is a primary weapon of domination, control, conquering your enemies. Food can create, ample food can stop revolutions. If people are starving, they'll go into the revolution modality. And the intelligence agencies like DARPA, they fully understand this. So the UN Food and Agricultural Organization is aggressively promoting insect consumption. So they're going to brainwash your kids. They're going to brainwash young adults to believe that food is the latest and greatest, that insects are the latest and the greatest food item. And just remember, you've seen it already. Any kind of mind change is now possible via scientific mind control, brainwashing, programming of the human mind, social engineering, and on and on and on. So just like they have brainwashed young children, in young children, I believe it's in most states, if not every state, but it's rolled out in most states, and that is legally your child going to school. If your child going to school, a boy or a girl, decides that they view themselves or perceive themselves as the opposite sex from what they biologically are. So let's say they're a girl, but they perceive themselves as a boy. Or let's say they're a boy, but they perceive themselves as a girl. They are legally allowed to talk to a school counselor confidentially. You're not allowed to be informed that your teenagers or whatever even had such a conversation with the school. You are totally locked out of the process. You are not allowed to be told. And the school doesn't legally have to tell you. And so they go there for counseling on their sexual identity. And that, of course, has the potential of leading down any path, including getting operations that will, on a biological level, change you from a male into a female or from a female into a male. And that can all be done. It will be paid for by the government, but it can all be done, and nobody legally has to inform you as the parent. It can be done totally against your will, but they don't even have to tell you they're doing it. And in fact, I think if you pursue it aggressively in proper way, you end up violating the law. So if they can do that, which is like outrageous, they can certainly brainwash your children to eat insects as food and love it. Never forget that, and love it through programming. All you have to do is, have a bunch of famous rock singers, pop singers, hip hop singers, celebrities, sports stars, whatever. You parade them on the media screens. They talk positively, like Jenner. They talk positively about the fact that they're going to have a sex change operation, and they're going to go from male to female or female to male. And you use another principle in social engineering or brainwashing, which is repetition. You keep repeating that message. So this is part of the formula that I've been explaining to you for 25 years or more. It's a formula, a scientific psychological formula, basically embedded in stone because it works. And all repetition, all brainwashing, all mind control, MK Ultra or whatever, advertising, persuasion uses similar principles. So one of the primary principles of controlling a person's mind, no matter how intelligent they are, that's irrelevant. One of the primary principles in programming a person's mind is that you present to them a series of highly desirable role models that can be lodged in their consciousness, like movie stars, beautiful models, male movie stars, female movie stars, athletic superstars, cultural icons and heroes, celebrities of every kind, Olympic gold winners or whatever. Again, movie stars are big. And you see, people will change and alter their own behavior very radically in order to get approval and praise from their peers or the group or the culture they live inside of. This is it's like a pathological human need to be accepted. And so the way people subconsciously devise plans to be accepted is they fixate on particular movie stars, music stars, athletic stars, or whatever. They lock into them, and then they change their behavior. They change their political beliefs. They change their sexual beliefs. They change their religious beliefs. They can change 100 different components of the average person's personality by continually showcasing the people that society says are the ultimate people, the stars. And because of the flaw in mankind's nature, people will radically adopt and change their behavior and self-beliefs themselves in order to transform themselves into the living entity of that embodiment of beliefs, no matter how crazy it is. Now, there's multiple principles in brainwashing and social engineering. Another primary principle, besides the use of the celebrity image, is repetition. When you or your child or a young adult or an adult or anybody begins to see over and over and over again, morning, noon, and night, basically through their cell phones, their laptops, and various TV screen type communication systems. Whether they're watching the Super Bowl or something else, they're being bombarded with advertising messages, bombarded with ideas, bombarded with occult beliefs, bombarded with all kinds of messages. And so and the same with the stars in the TV shows they watch. So people will radically change their presentation, their beliefs, so that they fit in to whatever the latest and the greatest identity is. Okay, they are desperately, they want to be part of this in group. And so they want to mirror the behavior, the dress, the language, et cetera, of the in group. Okay, so believe me, you will hear the celebrities at some point in the future, music stars, pop stars, movie stars, whatever, telling the listener or the viewer that they can join us in help saving the world by eating insects. But they probably won't call it insects. My guess is they'll give it a brand new branding name or marketing name. So it won't be insects. It will be some other verbiage that sounds hip, cool, dynamic, and safe. So they'll change the vocabulary. They always do that. So with abortion is murder, okay? But they don't call it murder. They call it pro-choice. They transform the word murder into a highly desirable word, choice. Choice implies freedom. You're in control. You're God. And it's much easier to sell people on abortions when you call it pro-choice, with that snotty hint of arrogance in your voice. Pro-choice. Christians, so often and so tragically, in the back of the line, because they choose to be in the back of the line. For years, we're fighting this cultural battle over abortion, and they were Christians and pro-lifers at that time were identifying themselves as anti-abortion activists, and the media kept calling them anti-abortion activists. The language of the term anti-abortion activist is like a Nazi-esque, highly negative term. Nobody in their right mind would want to claim to be an anti-abortion activist. It just, the word or the phrase resonates with the kind of death. See how ironic it is? That which is death is promoted as life, and that which is life is promoted as death. Finally, the Christians saw the light. That's why knowledge is power, and you got to have knowledge. So they rebranded themselves by calling themselves pro-life. Pro-life is a very, very effective, very, very powerful slogan with very, very positive associations subconsciously. I'm pro-life. Everybody wants to be pro-life. Pro-choice is great, but pro-life is like the ultimate. So that was very important, and they began to gain ground when they identified themselves as pro-life, not anti-abortion. But so when it comes, though, to the eating of insects, you can be sure they will change the term, the name, with a term or name that has some pizzazz to it that they can sell, because it's all about convincing you to eat bugs and love it, and absolutely love it. Okay, so there are all kinds of major companies, major government agencies making secret deals with the billionaire class. Bill Gates is involved in some capacity. He seems to be in the center of the cyclone in so many radical things that allegedly appear to produce death. I'm sure he has a list of prominent doctors who would completely refute that. But he sure seems to be anyway, a constant in these so-called scientific transformations. You think he eats bugs for dinner or breakfast or lunch? I doubt it. Now, you could always lie. You could tell people that this particular mixture of bugs that were dug out of the Amazon jungle, you make up a whole story. These particular bugs that that were dug out of the Amazon jungle. The reason the people in this Amazon jungle tribe have no wrinkles in their skin and they look 25 years younger than they actually are, and they don't have cancers and diseases and stuff, is because they're eating bugs in their food, and this composition of bugs contains longevity properties, anti-disease properties, anti-aging properties, all kinds of properties that make your skin glow, get rid of wrinkles, lose weight, live longer, enhance your immune system. Now, let's not call saying that a lie. Let's call it something closer to what they would call it. They would say our initial medical and scientific research laboratories and scientists have told us that it is highly possible that there is a connection between a kind of immortality, anti-aging, losing weight, longevity, building your immune system, getting rid of wrinkles and aging on your face and body, that our scientists, our laboratories are racing to unlock these secrets, and eating some kind of food composed of insects and it tastes good and it looks good, is a very small price to pay for not aging at all over a period of 25 years or whatever. In other words, you create based on the flimsiest of connections and potential truths. You create an entire mythology. They would call it a narrative. You would create an entire narrative surrounding the almost godlike benefits that will be bestowed on you and your children if you eat insects. Like these insects contain, like the fountain of youth, which is stuff like human growth hormone, which is very, very difficult for your body to manufacture. And it's like the secret, or one of the secrets to looking young, being young, et cetera, et cetera. So by the time they finish programming the population with images and words and interviews and commercials like that, there's no resistance, man. People will trample over one another. Now, I'm not trying to knock females. Males can be notoriously vain also. And I'm not saying every female is vain, and I'm not saying it's vain to want to look better or beautiful for men or women. I don't think it's vain to, within the framework of, as long as you're not doing something that's directly against the will of God, it's not necessarily vain to take products or powders or whatever that have some kind of track record of making you look younger or whatever it is you're seeking. Now, if you choose to eat insects, knowing full well it's insects, in trying to live longer and younger and look younger, I guess it's fine. I mean, that's your choice. But if you're doing it on the basis of research, which has not even remotely been proven at all to be true, and the real secret, hidden, dirty truth is that they want you to eat insects because it's far cheaper for them to manufacture and feed a global population. I don't think most men or women would be wanting to eat insects so enthusiastically if that was the real truth. But you can expect to be lied to, because our media now lies more than they ever tell the truth. Okay, so they call this process of getting people accommodated to eating insects, they call it nudging the public towards acceptance. And a number of studies from the European Consumer Organization and Germany's Environmental Agency currently report a very low demand among the general public regarding the eating of foods containing insects, which means the people, that's us, we the people, we don't want to eat insects. So quit forcing it down our throats when you're eating the finest of steaks or lobsters or fish or whatever, or organic vegetables or whatever, and organic fruits. So All right. So you can't, again, I'll talk to you about that in a minute. But you see, these people are very sneaky, very strategic, very Luciferian in effect. So they invent these scientific human programming methodologies. So, for example, they invent something called nudging. Nudging is a way of changing your behavior to fit the goal of the globalist elite. So once again, Rockefeller, in the Defender magazine, Children's Health Defense News and Views, on September 13th, 2022, there was an article entitled Rockefeller Foundation Nonprofits Spending Millions on Behavioral Psychology Research to Nudge More People to Get COVID Vaccines. So they develop psychological strategies to change your behavior and choices, likes and dislikes. It's right out of the book Brave New World or George Orwell's 1984. And the Rockefeller Foundation is right smack in the middle of this stuff, like constantly. They have an agenda. I'll let you figure it out what it is. The Rockefeller Foundation, the National Science Foundation, and they call these nonprofits, and they process hundreds of millions of dollars a year. But these giant foundations are spending countless millions of dollars, and one of the ways they change the thinking of the American public is through things like using slogans, using advertising, using propaganda. In fact, not in this article, but in another article from a very so-called mainstream prestigious publication, I read several articles where one of the key experts at the Council on Foreign Relations, started by Rockefeller, CFR, they were openly telling people, while televising it, they were openly telling world leaders and political leaders, they were telling them that it's perfectly all right. In fact, it's encouraged that governments should use psychological warfare and propaganda on them and lie to them in order to accomplish their goals. So the Rockefeller Foundation is openly advocating the usage of psychological warfare and propaganda and lying to be used on the public in order to control their minds. I mean, he doesn't care if people know or not, because he's, quote, an untouchable. So this same organization, even though critics of the project, well, let's talk about one of their projects. According to the Defender magazine, the Rockefeller Foundation and the SSRC claim the aim of their Mercury project, whose name is derived from the ancient Roman god of messages and communication, is to bolster public health and safety. But critics describe the Mercury project as one based on propaganda aimed at nudging. Keyword is nudging, because nudging is a technique of persuasion. Nudging is a technique. It's a sophisticated psychological technique of changing people's thinking and behavior and choices. So the Rockefeller Foundation uses propaganda, which is designed to nudge the unvaccinated to get vaccinated. So what you don't realize within your individual families, I'm going to answer a question for you, and I'm going to ask you in love to pay really close attention, because I'm going to just pass by it very quickly. But within the content of what I'm about to share with you, it's going to answer for you this question. You've probably been asking yourself, why over the last 6 or 7 years has there been so much strife in my family between me and my children and my children, husband and children, conflicts with friends or people at work? There's been an explosion, especially a fragmentation of the positive relationships in families. They've become violent, aberrant, and distorted. Okay, so what I want to consolidate in terms of what I'm trying to communicate to you with is simply that these highly financed, very powerful men, groups, think tanks, nonprofit foundations, let's be blunt, they're waging war against the common man all across the planet and even in America. Now, I know some of your friends are going to fall apart if I advise you to be very selective and specific and targeted when you bring up some of this information, because if people are not ready to hear it, you're just going to send them to, they're just going to go in orbit. So you want to be strategic as to when and how you communicate and how much you communicate. And I'll tell you right now, I speak to a lot of people across the world about these kinds of things, but I also speak to smaller circles of people. And I will confess to you that I make this mistake myself all the time, which is because I'm so passionate, like you are, about communicating the truth. I have a desire to share it. And not only that, it has to be strategic, but how long and how much do I share? And I have learned that I have to be very careful. No, I'm not censoring myself. I'm just being strategic on who and how and everything else I'm sharing with. Because look, if you've lived in a kind of programmed mindset like most people in America and around the world have, talking to them about this high level of truth it's too much for them. It's not about censoring yourself. It's about being strategic. So probably a very significant percentage of you, as well as the general public, as well as people in America especially, have experienced fragmentation and conflict in an unprecedented level during the last approximately 7 years. And we know what some of the reasons for that are. So this is by design, by the way. It's by design. So you have to be careful what kind of truth, if the truth, and how much truth you should share to a particular individual, no matter how close, no matter how much you trust them. Because look, once again, this subject matter, even though it's totally factual, even though it's totally documented, is just too massive for people whose reality is the product of psychological conditioning. It's more than they can handle. And so you need to just be careful and choose your shots wisely. Okay, so nudging is a specific psychological technique that can be done through social media or in conversations or whatever, and it's a way of pushing people along instead of clobbering them or aiming a gun at them or threatening them. Nudging is a more humanistic way, but just as deadly, because you, instead of telling somebody that they got to do this or that or the other, you nudge them into doing it. And don't be deceived by the power of nudging. Nudging ultimately can be far, well, look, nudging is actually studied in behavioral science. And according to one foundation, there are at minimum 200 global nudge units that specialize in applying behavioral science to everyday life. So there are nudge think tanks all over the US and the world who specialize in embedding behaviors through nudging, which they call global nudging. And it's part of a field in the field of behavioral science. And it comes from a concept known as nudging, which was used heavily, wake up, which was used heavily during the COVID-19 pandemic. And the science of nudging was heavily utilized by governments, public health officials throughout America and the world as a justification for stringent restrictions and countermeasures. So it's a way of dominating and controlling people. Now, you got to be aware of all these things, because I've noticed that there's been major changes in people's behavioral operating, the way they operate, the way they conduct themselves, the way they think. In the last 30 years, there's been massive changes in, let's just call it, the human personality. And somebody like me that's been around for a while, I have noticed in adversarial situations, unsafe situations, out in the public, that the entire atmosphere of these environments have changed. And if you have some kind of altercation with somebody or something or whatever, which has nothing to do with something you did, you were acting like a lady or a gentleman and being polite, etc., and all of a sudden you encountered somebody who didn't believe in those values of politeness. And so you're caught off guard, because subconsciously your expectation is that that you can appeal to them on the basis of them being a lady or a gentleman. Well, that's largely gone. And so you got to rethink and reteach yourself and reorientate yourself without surrendering your values on how to survive and thrive in an external environment that has radically changed. So this is just one of thousands of methodologies. And that's why people don't think like they used to, or part of the reason why. It's why everything has changed. And it's being done deliberately. And here's the part that people have the greatest resistance. And believe me, I understand it, because I had a tremendous, despite the fact that I knew it was true, despite the fact that I had read documentation about this going back decades and decades ago, despite the fact that I had read from credible sources and I'd seen the documentation, you, perhaps like me, I don't know, maybe you did it a different way, but I found myself having difficulty on a subconscious level, and even on a conscious level, I found myself having difficulty accepting the totality of the new world order I was living in, and it was no longer theoretical, that it had become real. And you know, it was like I kept banging my head into the ceiling of the room that I was in. I would attempt to transcend the ceiling, transcend the barrier, but I would find that I would continually bump my head on the proverbial ceiling. I couldn't go any farther, and I couldn't figure out why. And then I realized it all had to do with the fact that there was one great overarching mega truth that was above the vast majority of truths we're told to accept as truths. But this what I'm talking about now is an actual truth. It's just that it is difficult for every single one of us to actually accept it, even though it's true, and there are impeccable facts to support the reality that it's true. So this is the truth that I'm talking about. And if you're honest and you look inside yourself, you'll notice that really accepting this is very difficult to do, because it requires a complete transformation in your mind and your set of beliefs. Okay, and what I'm talking about is simply this. This is like radioactive. You will be stronger than it once you learn to not be afraid of it and conquer it, beginning with your own mind. But here's the truth I want to present to you. And that is the age-old historical fact that for thousands and thousands of years, mankind, billions of people across endless centuries, have all been, whether they knew it or not, but they were all captured and transformed into the slaves of a globalist elite who believed they were the gods and goddesses of planet Earth, and they had some kind of divine right to rule over the rest of us. So it's very hard to pass through this and process it. But the fundamental reality that you must come to terms with is this: there exists a numerical group that represents only 1% of the population or far less than that. They control 99% of the wealth. This 1% essentially controls you, whether you know it or not. And they control everything on planet Earth. Just 1% of this elite class controls 99% of the people and everything else. Now, they are Luciferians, and their goal is to follow Lucifer, and their goal is to overthrow the throne room of God. And right now they're in the process of a full-forced, invisible invasion of planet Earth using science fiction-like technology, science fiction-like futuristic weapons and methodologies. We are, until recently, we were in the fast track of being conquered by them, and their efforts at conquest continue 24/7. That's all I need to say, because it's going to take you a long time, just like I'm still having to process the enormity of that truth, which is backed up by the Bible, by the way. It's not just some idea that I plucked out of the sky. Okay, so the World Economic Forum, which, by the way, was funded by Rockefeller, created by Rockefeller, the goal of the World Economic Forum is to completely change our diet. Well, what business do they have in changing our diet? Because they're not going to you'll never be happier in your life. They're lying to you. They're lying to you. I'm telling you, they're lying to you. You will not be happy eating bugs. You will not. They're doing it because they want to keep you alive, to be their slaves, and keep you alive at the cheapest possible way they can. So meats and vegetables and fruits, those things eventually will be gone and replaced by insects in your food. And so they're in a full-on invisible campaign to nudge the public into eating all these foods that are really made of insects. Not exciting, is it? I mean, do you think that's exciting? It's not exciting to me. I think it's rather repulsive. But you know what? You got to step up your game. You got to understand what's really happening on planet Earth, and that the Bible is true. The Bible's not like a fantasy book, okay? The Bible is true. The Bible talks about everything that I've been talking to you about, not only just on today's program, but on all the programs. It's just that the Bible is using the language of its day, and the Bible is using, it's speaking to the culture from which it was written in. Well, we're, 2,000 years plus from the ascension of Jesus Christ into heaven. Well, the culture, the styles, the idioms, the language, all that stuff has changed. And so the Bible is far more scientific, far more, the Bible is at far higher a level than people think it is. It talks about very sophisticated and futuristic concepts. And once you understand that, you can really begin to understand essentially the Bible code. You can crack it. You can crack the Bible code, and the amount of knowledge, which equals power, will just pour into your life. That's why I need your help in expanding our ministry, getting new equipment, some of our equipment, because electronics evolves so quickly, some of our equipment is hindering us from full expansion. And so we critically need funds at this time to expand and to be effective. And if you go to paulmcguire.us, that's paulmcguire.us, you can donate securely to Paul McGuire Ministries of Paradise Mountain Church. Also, the links to all of our other social media pages is on paulmcguire.us. You just have to scroll down a little bit, and you can directly click and link to all kinds of social media sites. And so I ask you to make sure you join whatever you listen to us on or watch us on. Make sure you electronically click it so that you register yourself as a regular follower, a regular listener of the Paul McGuire Report. Okay, that's critical because that's the only way we can prevent their rigging, because they are rigging as fast as they can. Because by rigging, they can perpetuate the lies that they've told you all your life. Okay, so now I'm going to explain to you something else, expose something else, reveal something else about the food supply that you must know. We need to reflect and really seriously think about what's happening on planet Earth and in America right now. Yeah, it's great that we have a new president, and a lot of people have invested a lot of hope in that. And let's hope and pray that it could be incredibly positive. But unless these other things are addressed and rooted out, we are going to find ourselves living in a continual tyranny. Now, again, the weaponization of food goes back thousands and thousands of years in the history of human warfare. So what we have to understand is that the people who rule the world largely are these billionaire, trillionaire families and the global reset people, and they use many avenues to enslave mankind, to interfere with elections and everything else. So we have to understand that there's a reason why geographic locations in the United States, let me repeat this, it's all over the world, but also in the United States. Do you think it's just an accident that the Florida coast was blasted with hurricanes of such intensity that they left the devastation that usually can only be produced by nukes? You think that's just freak weather? I don't think it's freak weather, especially when you understand and you've stepped up your game and you understand that there is a reality called energy directed weapons, or directed energy weapons, DEW, a technology that began in the 1940s. So, why would people be flying or using satellites and fly over particular areas and literally, in effect, blast the homes and the neighborhood with these like death ray technology weapons being fired from planes and helicopters and satellites? And you can tell that it's not a normal fire because cars are melting. Buildings and houses are disintegrating completely like burned up paper. And just, anything that once had like a metallic form to it or whatever is melted. It's melted into the street or whatever, like cars are melted. It's freaky when you see it and take a look at it, because it means the heat level is unbelievable. Strange weather. You think it's just an accident? No, all of this is evidence. Think of all of these things as weapons. Quit being confused and thinking of these things as whatever you think they are. They're weapons, and they're being used against you. Well, how do you know that? People are dying in the areas where these weapons were used. People are dying all around you. So don't you think that would constitute the definition of a weapon? Of course you would. Most people can't handle that level of truth. They go into a state of cognitive dissonance. We cannot afford the luxury of cognitive dissonance or bad theology or misinterpreting the Bible. We can't afford that luxury. So these globalist organizations, Luciferians, ruled and controlled and owned by the wealthiest families in the world, they use organizations like the United Nations. They use other organizations. United Nations Food Summit. They use things like that, UNFSS, which took place a couple of days ago in Rome. And they are urging what they call a food transition. And to them, sustainable food is things like you eating bugs. So there are gigantic corporations, and I'm going to just withhold the naming of the corporations at the moment. But you would know the names of these corporations. They're prominent. They're the people who manufacture the cereal you buy at the supermarket. So you know their names. If I was to say the names of these corporations, they make the chicken you eat, the soda you drink, the tea you drink. It's just endless. So their goal is to many of the major corporations that I think they work with the heads of all these 7 corporations. I think at one time were called the Seven Sisters. And the Seven Sisters, I believe, I'm accurate in my recall, represented the 7 largest tobacco companies in the world, which made trillions of dollars because it was an addictive product. Now, I have heard that a lot of that big tobacco money, one way or the other, and I don't know the details of it, has found its way into buying up what's called big food. All the big food manufacturing companies. Are they secretly now being owned by the tobacco companies? Because we know for a fact that the tobacco companies had utter disdain on the fact that tobacco caused cancer in a lot of people. So how could you trust this same group of people to control what you eat, to control your food? Because they've already proven that they're willing to kill you to make a profit. Wake up. But you'll never hear about this in your smiling fake alternative media host or your smiling fake major media host. Because when it gets down to the nitty-gritty, they're not there. They'll only go down the rabbit hole so far to convince you that they're one of you. But they won't go all the way down the rabbit hole like I just did for you. And I just told you who's owning your food supply. They won't go there. They won't even acknowledge that dynamic exists. So, and now the UN, the United Nations, founded by Rockefeller, has joined hands with the WEF. That's the Great Reset, and a whole bunch of unaccountable keywords, unaccountable corporate agri-food and big data giants, which the authors being cynical, which have no time for democratic governance. By the way, this information comes from an article by Colin Todd Hunter entitled "Let Them Eat Bugs: Challenging the WEF's Corporate-Driven Food Reset." And so July 31st, 2023. So this is what's going on behind the scenes. The existing food system in the United States, I don't know, you may think it tastes great. I particularly don't. To a large extent, it produces disease because the food that you're buying lacks nutrients. It doesn't have the power to boost up your immune system, so it makes you vulnerable to catching all kinds of diseases. Once again, they don't care whether you live or die. And then, again, I don't want to name the specific names of the corporate giants at this time for legal reasons. So this is what we're dealing with. And now, then, of course, the lies are essential to mobilizing people to behave the way you're trying to program them to behave. So they're communicating a lying message. The WEF is, the UN is, they're communicating a lying message that, oh, it's food production, which is the real cause of global warming. You see, the word global warming is simply a catch-all word you can use to blame any of our problems, any problem we have in America or around the world. All we have to do ultimately is blame it on global warming. And so you're always fighting a complete fiction villain. Global warming is not the reason farms are being shut down. There's lessening food production. You got trillionaire people, you know his name. Why is he buying up farmland like crazy all over the United States? He's not growing food on it. So somebody wants the people to starve. Somebody wants the people to starve. Guess who? So farms, the WEF, this group of, believe me, they have some kind of connection to the secret Nazi financing, the secret Nazi hierarchy that was going on in Europe under Adolf Hitler. They're mark my words. Mark my words. The only reason I haven't come forward yet is that I don't have all the documentation that I want. But mark my words, there is some kind of deep, dark, devious, and very evil connection between what Adolf Hitler and the Nazis were all about and what the World Economic Forum and the Great Reset is all about. Remember that I told you that. Write it down. Remember that I told you that, because that is just one of those things that when you open the door on it, you will be shell-shocked. Okay, so Klaus Schwab, or Klaus Schwab, in a report by Hunter Fielding on June 14th, 2024, Global Research. The United States and 12 other nations are signing a World Economic Forum, WEF agreement, that seeks to engineer global famine. Why would the United States publicly go on record, along with other groups, why would the United States of America and 12 other nations publicly sign a World Economic Forum agreement to engineer a global famine? A global famine means a global death of millions and millions and millions because there's no food, by destroying the agricultural industry. So you see, here they are, taken from their own report, their own goals, the WEF. They're coming right out in your face, looking at you in the face, and telling you that they have a goal to engineer a global famine, which another translation would be they're going to engineer global starvation by destroying the agricultural industry. I mean, you see, the reason there's no reaction from Christians and Christian leaders and Christian ministries and conservatives and most other people is because most people are dead. But Christians are not supposed to be dead. You're supposed to be alive in Christ. So one has to seriously suspect, not judge, but seriously suspect whether or not somebody's a true Christian by whether or not they're seeking after knowledge on this stuff to set the captives free, like Jesus commanded us to. Here's a name of the nations that publicly joined this agreement to engineer a global famine and destroy the agriculture industry: Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Burkina Faso, Chile, Czech Republic, Ecuador, Germany, Panama, Peru, Spain, the United States, Uruguay. So no meat production in Australia, Brazil, and America. That's what the globalists have in mind for you. Okay, so you have to understand that once again, they're going to lie, propaganda, whatever you want to call it, social engineering. They're going to lie. They're going to lie and tell you, well, we got to do this for an emergency. They're going to use the same lie to try to declare martial law. They're going to use the same lie to kill agricultural production, force you to eat bugs. They're not eating bugs. So if it was so good for you, you see, and then the rationale, the reason why they're lying to you and saying, well, we have to do this for your own good. They have to create a lie, a narrative that they can con you into believing, which is that global warming is so dangerous that to save the planet, you got to eat bugs and give up anything of real nutritional value. I know what I told you was sobering and disturbing. Believe me, I don't enjoy that, but I have a God-given conscience like you do. And if I know about stuff and I can make some difference, however small a difference it may be, then I have to do what I believe God is asking me to do, which is to be a faithful watchman on the wall. But I can only do that to the degree that you're willing to ask the Lord how much you can give or contribute or financially gift to Paradise Mountain Church or Paul McGUIRE Ministries. And then whatever God tells you to do, even if it's big. And I'm saying that not to manipulate you. I'm saying that is that people have a autopilot response in their brain where they say, well, no, I will never do this or I will never do that. But what if God's telling you to do something else at a particular moment? Well, of course, you should be obeying the Lord. So I need your help. We need to raise an unusual amount of funds. I don't spend the funds on self-indulgent, luxurious frivolities. You know, that there are a lot of groups that do that. It's all hands on deck, focused to do the best that we can with what we have. So your help is essential. Also, your prayer, warrior support for me, my family, and those associated with the ministry. And also, absolutely important, join, be a regular follower or listener of the Paul McGUIRE Report on the social media you use, because that's how we destroy their rigging, the rigging of the deep state. Recognize that there is all-out spiritual warfare in the realm of social media. Rigging people's numbers, redirecting people that are intending to visit your website, but they're secretly being redirected somewhere else. All kinds of games can be played. So, you know, go to different social media platforms that you listen to the Paul McGUIRE Report on and join as a regular listener, which of course is free, like Getter, Truth, Gab, Brighteon, Rumble, BitChute, Odyssey, Roku. You can try YouTube. I mean, last time I checked, I was censored for speaking the truth in love and trying to save lives. Podbean, SoundCloud, Podchaser, Blog Talk Radio, so many others, iHeartRadio, Twitter, which is now X, and other stuff. Okay? So visit them, join our, and the key is to learn how to network, to come together as one, to be, in effect, the supernatural church of God, the supernatural body of Christ on earth, to train ourselves now to learn how to communicate and help one another as they attempt to restrict, block, censor, redirect the information that we're communicating. Thank you for your support and prayers. God bless you. This is Paul McGUIRE. Visit paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us.